Ever wonder why some countries have two capitals, or two cities where government power is divided, or even two cities that people think are the capital, when in reality there's just one? More often than not, this is a result of obscure, sometimes bizarre history that a lot of people don't really know about. And more recently, governments have been establishing new capitals as a result of decades, sometimes centuries, of industrialization and mushrooming population growth. Welcome to Intrigued Mind. In this video, we take a look at 3 countries around the world whose capital cities, singular or plural, have sown no shortage of confusion to tourists and trivia enthusiasts. The landlocked Andean nation of Bolivia, home to the now Insta-famous Uyuni salt flats, makes the list. Officially, its constitutional capital is the colonial gem of Sucre, where the Spanish established regional control some half a millennium ago. But today, La Paz, the ramshackle mountain city at almost 12,000 feet above sea level and sprawling with markets, is home to the country's executive and legislative branches of government. So what's going on here? Sucre, called La Plata during the colonial era, was where Bolivia officially declared its independence from Spain in 1825. After nearly 300 years of Spanish rule, it was declared the new country's capital in 1839 and named after the Venezuelan revolutionary leader Antonio José de Sucre. The constitutionally recognized capital has been Sucre ever since, but at the end of the 19th century, a series of events would cause a governmental power shift over to La Paz. The origins of this shift lie in the War of the Pacific, fought between Chile and a Peruvian-Bolivian alliance between 1879 and 1884. Bolivia suffered crippling defeats, but more importantly, this country was stripped of its regions in the Atacama Desert and lost access to the sea. After the national humiliation, the country's political factions were divided. On the one hand, the conservatives, made up of bankers, industrialists, major landowners, and clergymen, were willing to accept defeat and cozy up to the Chileans if it meant protecting industrial and mining interests. They were predominantly based in Sucre, a city which historically derived most of its wealth from the profitable silver mines of Potosi. On the other hand, a more recent and vocal faction, under the umbrella title of the Liberals, were advocating for a revenge war against Chile to reclaim the lost land. They were a motley group of petty industrialists, lawyers, journalists, and academics, centered around La Paz, Oruro, and Cochabamba, but mainly in La Paz, which was rapidly expanding at the turn of the century. Unable to settle their differences peacefully, a bloody war broke out in 1898 between the conservative and liberal factions, with atrocities on both sides. The liberals claimed victory the following year, which brought them to power and allowed them to dictate where the country's high politics would be conducted. What's more, the gold and silver mines near Sucre and Potosi were drying out. The country's economy had already started shifting toward the northwest, largely fueled by the tin industry. La Paz was much more diversified, also with strong commercial links to Peru. The liberals therefore proclaimed La Paz as Bolivia's de facto capital, bringing the seats of the executive and legislative branches to the cold, windswept canyon of La Paz. They tried to bring over the judicial branch but failed, just as they failed to turn Bolivia into a federation. Sucre has held on to the judiciary ever since, in the dazzling form of the Supreme Court of Justice. And though the city maintains both cultural and official capital status, it is not where Bolivia's government convenes, nor where the country's laws are passed. The whys and the whats of the Netherlands' capital city baffles a lot of people, not least the Dutch. Then there's the distinction between Holland and the Netherlands.
What is Holland?
What do you mean, what is it? It's a country right next to Belgium.
No, that's the Netherlands.
Holland is the Netherlands.
Then who are the Dutch?
And why the Dutch are called the Dutch when the Germans are called Deutscher, but that's a story for another day. The constitutional capital is the iconic city of Amsterdam. However, The Hague, home to a plethora of international organizations, is not only the resident city of the Dutch monarchy, i.e. the nation's head of state, but also home to the cabinet, the States General, the Supreme Court, and the Council State of the Netherlands, making The Hague the de facto administrative capital. So how did this happen? Again, history is our source. Predating the Netherlands as a unified country under a constitutional monarchy was an early modern state called the Dutch Republic. This was a confederation of autonomous provinces, with an Estates General and monarchy located in The Hague. Each province was run by figures called stadholders, or stewards. These positions were initially open to anyone. Eventually, though, the political landscape evolved so that only the members of the Orange-Nassau dynasty, with origins back to the Middle Ages, were stadtholders. By the mid-1700s, the title had become hereditary, and the Orange family basically monopolized state power from The Hague. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, a Republican faction developed which would repeatedly challenge the hold of the Orange family, on several occasions temporarily abolishing the stadtholderate. The base of the stadtholder's most fervent critics was Amsterdam, by far the most populous city in the province of Holland, and for centuries a leading hub for culture, finance, and trade. The stadtholderate was abolished in 1795 at the hands of the French revolutionary leaders. Over a decade later, Napoleon invaded modern-day Netherlands, and in 1807 set up a puppet state under the rule of his brother, Louis Napoleon. The new monarch would soon declare Amsterdam as the kingdom's capital, and even converted Amsterdam's 17th century town hall into his royal palace. 1808 to 1810 would be the only period in Amsterdam's history when it was both the capital and the seat of the government. Flash forward 3 years later to 1813, Napoleon's European empire was crumbling, the Netherlands were lost, and by December, Prince William VI of Orange was restored to the throne. The Netherlands became a constitutional monarchy in 1814, and though the seat of power was brought back to the city and residence of the Crown, The Hague, the constitutional capital was declared as Amsterdam, still the preeminent city in the region. This decision was an olive branch from the Orange family to the Republicans in recognition of the new kingdom's civic and republican destiny, and the legacy survives today, over 200 years later. The East African country of Tanzania has its capital not in its historic nucleus, Dar es Salaam, the country's largest and most populous city for decades, but in the central city of Dodoma. Yet many, not least the Tanzanian people, hold Dar es Salaam to be the capital. Through resistance, confusion, or both. Let's see why. At the turn of the 20th century, Dar es Salaam, Arabic for abode of peace, was the administrative and commercial center of German East Africa, of which modern-day Tanzania was part. After World War I, the city was transferred to British rule. When Tanzanian independence came around in 1961, Dar es Salaam was already a sprawling multi-ethnic metropolis, with the best commercial opportunities in the newly formed country. State power, as a result, stayed there. But over a decade later, in 1973, the National Socialist government decided it would relocate the capital to Dodoma. Founded in 1890 as a German settlement, Dodoma would essentially be rebuilt from scratch. It was chosen for several reasons. First, the new government sought to rebuild the country after independence from colonial rule. This meant distancing itself from its imperial past. As a coastal city, Dar es Salaam was built to facilitate European commerce, and little attention was paid to developing the interior. More sinister still, the Zanzibar archipelago, situated to the east of the former capital, became the center of East African slave trade during the 1800s under the Oman Empire. This resulted in the enslavement of 65 to 90% of the Arab Swahili population, whose descendants make up the majority of Tanzania's citizens today. Another symbolic motivation was that Dodoma lies in the country's center. Therefore, the Tanzanian government would be seen as closer to the disparate peoples of the new country. With over 300 ethnic groups, the city, according to state officials, was meant to be the chief village in a nation of villages, embodying a rural feel and following the site's natural topography. This was also in line with the country's socialist identity at the time. Practical matters held sway as well. Unlike the tropical heat and humidity of Dar es Salaam, Dodoma boasts cooler climates, thought to foster greater productivity. What's more, Dar es Salaam, like other African hubs in the 70s, was expanding rapidly, resulting in excessive pollution, overcrowding, and grim urban aesthetics. The city's reorganization was considered too costly, and the creation of an entirely new capital was seen as an impetus for another economic hub. This would take some pressure off and resources away from Dar es Salaam. State entities were relocated in the 1970s. However, urban plans for the new capital have been a slow-moving and broadly unsuccessful enterprise. Lack of funding and a general dearth of political, industrial, and commercial will have dogged the city's construction, resulting in underdeveloped facilities and a generally lackluster quality of life, which have made official bodies resistant to relocation. Embassies are continually based in the former capital. The Prime Minister spends more time there than at Dodoma. While all ministers and their staff have permanent offices and residences in both cities, this is widely regarded as a useless extravagance. And the capital's relocation is continually a source of friction. To this day, many Tanzanians don't know for certain what their capital is. Many more countries around the world have two capitals. South Africa even has three. Bolivia and the Netherlands are good examples of countries where, due to historic reasons, state power, or at least the majority of it, is concentrated in a different city to its constitutional capital. Yet today, many more countries actually have two capitals, or disputed capitals, for reasons similar to Tanzania, with the undesirable effects of rapid urban growth and the need to foster greater regional equality across countries. State institutions are relocating to new cities. We're seeing this now in South Korea, and more recently in Egypt, among several other African countries. This trend is likely to accelerate throughout the 21st century, and the capitals we know today could be no more than major cities tomorrow. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.